That's weird. Okay. Anyway, so with that being said, so let's go ahead and let's go ahead and dive into the second part of chapter 8 here. So okay, so let me share the screen really quickly. So okay, so hold on. Okay, let's see. Okay, all right. Okay, so we're gonna work. So today what we're gonna take a look at is we're going to take a look at who votes here, and there are multiple factors that explain why people vote, and we're going to take a look at the general categories that affect voter turnout and the ability for people to go and vote, right? So there's social and demographic characteristics and attitudes about politics. So this is at the this is more of a sociological view in terms of the different types of groups we have in society and their voting patterns and um, how they view politics and also how that affects whether they vote or not. Political environment during the election. So we're also going to talk about how every election is different in terms of there's factors that go into an election season that can determine not just whether people are going to vote, but also what they're voting for. You know, every election cycle, there's different issues that people tend to value more. The economy is always at the top of the list because if you don't have a good economy, then it's really hard to be able to live your lives, right? If you don't have if that's affecting your livelihood, then you're not able to have a house, you're not able to, be able to live your lives, right? You're not able to have healthcare. So the economy is always a big concern for people and the health of the economy and the way the economy is going. I know there's talk about how we could be due for a recession coming up, so that's on people's minds. So the economy is always at the top of the list. Like if you look at all the different, like all across, the last, several elections, you'll always see like the economy is usually in the top like three or something like that in terms of people's concerns, which makes a lot of sense, like I said, right? Because that is people's livelihoods. So without your livelihood, you really can't do anything else. And then there's also state electoral laws that also affect uh, whether people can vote, such as some states have early voting, some states, and within the states that have early voting, they have more days of early voting than others. Some states also have what's called same day registration, where you can register to vote and then vote. Texas doesn't have that, but in other states they do. And then we'll also take a look at some of these electoral laws that can also impact voter turnout and voting rates here. So that's what we're going to take a look at here today. Okay, so let's start with socioeconomic status. So socioeconomic status is the most consistent factor in predicting who votes. Socioeconomic status refers to the status in society based on level of education, income, and occupational prestige, right? So I'm sure some of y'all have heard of socioeconomic status if you've taken other social science classes like sociology for sure, maybe criminal justice as well. If let's say you're studying about offender rates and who tends to engage in criminal activity, not all the time, but there usually is a correlation between lower socioeconomic status and being more susceptible to engaging in criminal activity. But the point of what we want to talk about here today is that socioeconomic status, of course, refers to your social standing within society. And the way this is measured, again, not all the time, because there's plenty of people who didn't graduate college and became rich. I mean, if you look at people like Bill Gates and I think Zuckerberg too, right? I think they they went to college but they didn't finish, and of course they became really rich with their with their with the groundbreaking industries that they were involved in. But the point is that they're usually, for the most part, because that's usually rare. That doesn't usually happen all that often. For the most part, there usually is a correlation between higher levels of education and higher income. I mean, like I've said before, that's why you all are here in this class, right? Because you want to increase your level of education, and with that, you are able to also, there's a better chance to increase your income. And with that higher level of education, higher levels of income, that also comes occupational prestige. There are certain professions that tend to be looked at more respectfully in society. Like doctors, attorneys, professors, things like that. Um, and again, and there usually is that correlation between more education and more money, right? Because the more educated you are, the more prestigious your job is going to be because it requires more responsibility. So of course you also should get compensated for that, right? With the more specialized type of work. I mean, doctors make a bunch of money because their job is extremely specialized. They're dealing with people's health. So it makes sense that they would, be compensated, greatly for that job because it requires a lot of skill and it requires a lot of responsibility to use that skill. So again, that's why there is that correlation there. And so because of this, what the book says is that people who are on the higher rungs of society usually tend to vote more. So individuals are more likely to vote if they have higher levels of education. This is the most important factor in predicting voter turnout. Education is also associated with encouraging others to vote or support an issue and donating to a candidate or cause, and they have higher levels of income. So we kind of talked about this a little bit before, right? That people who are, in these prestigious positions within society, they're usually on average going to be more politically involved for a variety of different reasons, right? Obviously, they're more educated. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're all educated like in social sciences or anything like that. But because they're educated in general, they understand the importance of voting because they're more highly educated. They're exposed to more of these critical ideas, and so that plays hand in hand with they have more civic knowledge than the average person. And then also their jobs can also contribute to more civic engagement um, because these types of highly prestigious jobs also uh, what I'm trying to say here is that this is why you see like a lot of like doctors, attorneys, they tend to be like in these civic organizations like the Chamber of Commerce or uh, a lot of these attorneys tend to be serve in government themselves, either they're like state reps, state legislators, things like that. So a lot of them are involved in the political process as well as their jobs can also have a lot of politics that goes with it, right? So like doctors, they're part of like the Texas Medical Board, and I'm sorry, they can be part of the, not the Texas Medical Board. They can part of it. They can have their own associations. The attorneys have their associations as well. So these jobs tend to also involve very political people because of what's at stake within their jobs, right? Because of all the money that they're making and because of the level of expertise that's needed. It's going to be very difficult to find people that aren't at least somewhat political in these types of jobs, right? And again, this also correlates with higher levels of income here, right? So this is why, again, like I said, a lot of these people, they tend to be very political. They tend to be involved politically more so than the average person, because I guess you could also make an argument that they have a lot more to lose than the average person. So because they've got prestigious jobs, they want to try to protect those jobs, right? Um, so that kind of goes into some of the reasons as to why people that a lot of these prestigious people within society, they tend to that tends to reflect more political activism as well as voting. Now there's also age, and sometimes a lot of times this also correlates where people that are at the higher ends of society usually tend to be older because they've had more time to be professionals, so they've been able to save more money. That's why when I see like people that have these fancy houses, it's very rare to see a young person in a fancy house because the young person just hasn't been able to work that much, right? So like when I see like if I'm driving by people's houses and let's say it's like a nice big house and then I see like they're getting their mail, it's usually an older person because it's going to take them 10, 15, 20 years of being a professional to be able to afford a big house like that for the most part. Sometimes there's exceptions, but for the most part. So let's go with age. So older individuals are more likely to vote than younger individuals. And like I said, usually this does also correlate where the more prestigious people within society usually also tend to be older because, like I said, they've been working longer. Younger people often do not vote due to lack of interest in politics or because they have not been mobilized to participate. There have been some campaigns tend to target older voters over younger voters. Now, we'll break down in terms of why this is here right now. So let's kind of think about this here a little bit. Let me ask you all, like, let me see what you all think about this. So why do you think this is? Why do you think that older individuals, also going back to what we were talking about before, why do you think that older individuals tend to vote more than younger individuals? Why is it are older people more likely to vote? Why do you all think this is? Let's see if you all can think of some reasons as to why you all think this is. Why do older people tend to vote more than younger people? I mean, a lot of y'all are younger, right? Have you all had a chance to vote? I mean, some of y'all have been politically active and have voted, but why do you all think it's more? Why is it easier for older people to vote than for younger people? Because the numbers show this, right? That older people vote more than younger people. So what's going on here? Why do you all think that older people tend to vote more? What do y'all think could be some of the reasons here? So let me give my mom as an example. So she is I shared with y'all before, right, that my mom is very political. And I think I mentioned to y'all one of the reasons why she's gotten a lot more political over the years. Does anyone want to take a guess at why do you think that is? Because she didn't used to be, and now she is in the last several years.
Maybe because of the changes in society.
Well, yes, that definitely is a big factor too. There has been some political issues that she has been very concerned about. Yes, that definitely is true. But there is something else that she has now that she didn't used to have, and that gives her the ability to be more political and ultimately get involved more. What do y'all think that could be? Now that she's more
For people like they know about his historical like remembering happening in the past that they know a lot of presidents to represent the truth or something that I happened
yes,
a
yes,
long time.
right. Yes, that is a factor too, right? Is that more experience, seeing more things happen, living life more. That definitely is a big factor as well. Yes. Let's see. Hazel says, around me, I've noticed that nowadays younger people don't care to get informed about politics because of their lack of time, unlike older people who've had more experience in the area. Yes, Hazel. Yes, you're exactly right as well. The lack of time affects younger people, and because older people tend to have more time, they can get involved more, because that's where I was going with my mother, because she's retired. She doesn't have to do an 8 to 5 job anymore. So she's got the time to be able to, watch the news and read articles and get involved politically. So yes, you all are exactly right in terms of how that for younger people, they don't have the time. They're barely starting off their lives, right? They're concerned about paying bills because they're not making that much. Younger people, usually some of them are working 2 jobs. You know what I mean? I know I can say this for myself as well, that when I was trying to, when I was in college, I wasn't really concerned about getting involved politically. I mean, it was interesting, but I just didn't have the time to devote to, like, going block walking and registering people to vote. I just didn't have the time. I was focused on myself. I had to try to fix my life first. So yes, you all are exactly right that all contributes as to why older people, tend to vote more than younger people. And yes, and yeah, because when some people say, like, oh, like younger people, it's because they might not care or whatever. I don't necessarily think it's that, so to speak. Although there are some people who don't. I mean, there's adults who don't care about politics either. But I think it's more so because their priorities in life just don't give them the time to be able to. I mean, again, it's like, I wasn't donating to candidates because I didn't make enough money to make ends meet, right? Now that I make more money, I can afford to do that, because it's kind of more like a luxury, right? To be able to donate to candidates because I have the money to spare. And also I do it because since I don't have the time to go and volunteer like I would like to, so I'm like, okay, well, let me contribute. At least I'm doing something. I help out in the way that I can. But yes, you all are exactly right in terms of these are reasons as to why older people do tend to vote more than younger people, right? Now, there have been campaigns since the 90s that have sought to increase voter turnout among young voters, such as Rock the Vote, Rap the Vote, Voto Latino. There's a lot of these campaigns. Like MTV was very big on this. They're always running, ads, to go and vote and things like that, where they have like celebrities that will go in and try to encourage people to vote. But it still is an issue where you still see, uh, on average, older people tend to vote more than younger people. And because of low voter turnout by young people, this has implications for policies addressed by government. What this means here is that that's not to say that the government isn't going to care about the issues that young people are concerned about, but because the young people aren't voting, their voice is not being heard as loudly as the older people, right? So if you've got just a bunch of older people who are voting, then the politicians are going to cater to the needs and concerns of the older voters because those are the people that are voting, right? So what this does is this creates a situation where, like the student loan debt crisis, because this is something that mostly affects younger people, right? Older people probably don't have student debt. So because you have a bunch of older people that are voting, and of course we could also make the argument that a lot of the people serving in government are also older. So that could have an implication to where is our government, because it's older people that are involved politically, both voting as well as serving in government, could that be a situation where the concerns of the younger people might not necessarily get addressed as adequately as the concerns of the older people, right? So that does become that does become an implication here because of the lack of voting for younger people. So definitely something to think about here. So okay, now let's dive into some of the groups here. Right now we're going to take a look at some of the demographics, right, like race and ethnicity. So let's talk about African Americans. So African Americans have long been deprived of voting rights, as we've discussed in chapter 5. Going back to the Jim Crow era laws and the literacy tests and the poll taxes. And so this, of course, has had an effect on voting trends within the African American community. And so descriptive representation, or being represented by a member of one's racial and or ethnic group, has a positive effect on participation. So, conversely, you could also make an argument that the lack of representation could also have a negative effect on participation, right? So, if you've got candidates who are running for public office, but you can't really relate to them either on a race or gender or socioeconomic level, then it's going to be hard for you to get it's going to be hard for you to be mobilized and to be excited, to getting involved politically, if all the people that are running are people that are not really like you and they don't really share anything in common with you all, right? So with that being said, of course, we definitely do need to talk about the historic Obama presidency, right? So of course, former President Barack Obama being the first African American president, this of course obviously had a huge galvanizing effect within the African American community, right? So the Obama presidential campaigns in 2008 and 2012 closed the voting gap between blacks and whites, but black turnout declined again in 2016. So if you remember, 2016 was the election between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. So um, and I remember vividly, this election because I was studying it, and I hadn't gotten hired at SCC yet. The next year I would, but I was immersed in my political science master's. So we were definitely discussing this election at great deal. And yes, the truth is that the Obama coalition that was successful in terms of turning out for President Obama, and the successful mobilization did not turn out for Hillary Clinton. And there's a variety of different reasons as to why that is. You also have to go back to 2008 when Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama were pitted against each other in the 2008 Democratic primary. So there could still have been some of that uneasiness, that tension, so to speak. But regardless of that, the point is that the African American community was not energized to come out to vote for Hillary Clinton. Now they did come out and voted for Joe Biden in 2020, which makes a lot of sense because Joe Biden, of course, was President Obama's former VP, right? So there is that connection there. Um, but again, so this, of course, is the other interesting thing about the African American community is that they are very united when it comes to their support of the Democrat Party. Consistently, African Americans tend to vote for Democrats at around almost 90%, 85 to almost 90% of African Americans support the Democrat Party. Now, again, this is not all that different from what we saw back when at the end of the war, right, where African Americans voted for the Republicans because the Republicans at the time were the party of Lincoln. They were the progressives. They were the party that freed them, right? So African Americans have always been loyal to the the political side of the aisle that is, more for, like social justice and things like that, because of, they've had a history of that, right? Does that kind of make sense that they've had a history of supporting political parties and supporting them wholeheartedly with almost the entire community, supporting the parties that they feel, advocate, for them and social justice and things like that, right? So concentrated poverty or persistent Black urban poverty and segregation act as barriers to African American participation. So the percentage is high in terms of, the political parties that African Americans support, but the voter rates are still not all that high, right? And there are these issues, right? When it comes to going back to what we were saying, right? If it's going to be hard for you to, it's going to be hard for you to get, get involved politically if you're worried about paying your bills, and let's say, there's also a lot of that inner city violence that goes on, right? Like in some of these cities like Chicago and Detroit, and you could even say Houston also in a way, that, life hits them hard, so to speak, right? Does that kind of make sense? So they're not voting is not at the forefront of their mind. They're just worried about surviving, right? So because of all the poverty that's going on, especially like in these inner cities, and a lot of the violence that's going on, as well as continued segregation and continued racial issues that are going on, right? Like with Black Lives Matter, and how there's still a lot of racial tension going on. This does cause situations where African Americans might feel discouraged from getting involved in the political process in general, because they might feel like, well, the system isn't working for us, so why bother, type of thing, right? Which again is totally understandable. That happens to a lot of people in terms of where they might just give up. However, linked fate or a shared sense of collective identity helps to increase voting and political participation. So what does help, though, is that the African American community does tend to be rather united when it comes to within their communities, right? So this is where you see a lot of you have a lot of these initiatives, like within a lot of the Black churches, right? They have the Souls to the Polls type of programs where they'll take their parishioners to go vote after Sunday service. So there is that sense of community within the African American community. In a lot of these areas, especially, areas where you kind of have like these, these enclaves, so to speak. These African American communities. So the point that I'm trying to make here is that the voting rates are not high, but for the people who do vote, they do try to get other people to be enthusiastic, and they do try their best, but there is a lot of, socioeconomic issues that do get in the way of them being able to vote, so to speak, right? So that's kind of what I wanted to discuss here with the African Americans here. So let's move on now. These are some good charts also I want you all to take a look at in terms of the, this is the charts that I want you all to take a look at here as well. This is good because it does show that correlation between higher levels of education in terms of, voting in the presidential elections, as well as, you'll see the drop off right there, right? When it comes to who was voting. So you see there's the drop off in the African American community from 2012 to 2016. So again, they did not turn out for Hillary Clinton. The white vote has been, pretty consistent, and then Asian Americans and Hispanics have been at, lower rates than what we've than some of these other groups here. So okay, and then of course also by age, again we see that the older voters tend to be more here, as well as employed and unemployed, right? So okay, so let's continue. So let's go with the whites here really quickly. So okay, so the majority of voters in U.S. elections are white. Whites tend to vote Republican, but big differences exist based on educational levels, right? So again, this is not, with a lot of this data, again, there are exceptions to this data, right? It's more often than not, right? We'll also talk about, like, we've said before how males tend to be more conservative than females, which again is more often than not, but it's not always the case here, right? So this is talking about how that when you look at the white vote, one of the best ways to look at how whites, the breakdown in terms of how whites vote is through, the education levels, right? So the majority of whites with college degrees support Democratic candidates and vote at higher rates, and then whites without college degrees support Republicans, and are less likely to vote. And of course, a great example here, well, we'll talk about this here in a bit. So the point that I want you all to understand here is that the distinction when it comes to the white votes, in terms of the best way to determine how white people are going to vote in terms of which political parties they support and which candidates they support, is based on education levels, right? So the higher the education level, the more likely you're going to vote Democrat, right? And usually this correlates with people with college degrees, right? And we've talked about this before, right? That people who go to college are going to be exposed to more of these ideas and things like that, so that can shape their political viewpoints. And then people who don't go to college, who might not necessarily be exposed to some of these classes, such as government 2305 or some of these other classes, they're going to tend to be more on the conservative side, and they tend to vote more Republican, right? So there is that correlation, right? Donald Trump in 2016 and 2020 mobilized less educated and lower income whites. Okay, so again, and this explains why why Trump was able to be successful, right? Because he was able to get support from these the white people who were lower income, because again, this does also correlate between lower levels of education and lower income, right? So there usually is that correlation. So yeah, Republicans, so Trump is not an exception, right? Republicans have always done well with whites who tend to be not too high on the socioeconomic ladder, right? And of course we'll also talk about how there a lot of times there's also that correlation between the lower income whites and the evangelical vote. We're going to talk about religion here in a bit. And in-group identification is less prevalent among white Americans because there's not really too many differences when it comes to heritage and things like that. What I mean by this is that white Americans, even though they didn't all come from Great Britain, right? Some came from Germany, some came from Poland, but you don't necessarily see those strong cultural differences like you might see like within the Hispanic community, right? And of course, a lot of that is because of the fact that these white Americans did not just come from Germany or Poland recently, right? This is their ancestors back in the back at Ellis Island and things like that, right? So the group differences might be more just kind of, oh well, yes, my dad is like my grandpa was Polish and things like that, and so but what I'm trying to say is that the differences are not all that pronounced, as opposed to someone who maybe is just recently came from some of these countries and things like that, right? So again, so what I want the takeaway to get from the discussion of white voters is the educational levels will play a role here. Okay, let's go to Latinos and Latinas. So Latinos and Latinas have historically been referred to as the sleeping giant. The Latino and Latina population is a large portion of the U.S. population, but it is also a segment with low levels of political participation, right? So the reason why they're called the sleeping giant is because, as you can see, Hispanics do not have high, they do not vote at high levels, right? They do not get involved politically for the most part, but because they are, the largest and fastest growing minority group, as it says here, they're considered a sleeping giant because if they were to wake up and get involved politically, they could be a force to be reckoned with in American politics. The problem, though, like I said, is that they don't turn out to vote, right? So they are the largest and fastest growing minority group. However, most are recent immigrants with fewer resources. So because they're recent immigrants, they might not have their citizenship yet. And again, similar to what's going on in the African American community, they're just trying to survive here, right? Their concern about politics is not something that is going to be at the forefront of their minds because they're just trying to get their bills paid. But again, we have seen some trends though where Hispanics are starting to get more politically involved, right? Latino and Latina registration and turnout have been steadily increasing. It's been increasing in areas where Hispanics are starting to gain more. They're starting to gain more. Their population numbers are growing. Like states like Arizona, Nevada, where the Hispanic population is really taking off. Those states are starting to see more increases in voter turnout amongst Hispanics, right? Texas is still lagging behind some of these areas here. And but in some of these other states, we have seen the Hispanic population really increase and really, flex their political muscle, so to speak, right? Especially like in Arizona and in like the Las Vegas area in Nevada. Latinos and Latinas have heavily favored Democrats in recent elections, although this is also changing. You know, South Texas, as you all probably are aware of, right? This area is becoming more Republican. We just had the first Republican Congresswoman from District 15, right? Monica de la Cruz, right? So she just won the election against my one of my good friends, Michelle Vallejo, but yeah, she won the election, and so now she is the congresswoman from this district, right? And she's Republican. Um, you all have probably seen this, right? The last couple of years, I have never seen the amount of Republican support that's been going on in South Texas. I've lived here my whole life. I've never seen this much Republican support. And this is actually something that I did a research paper on for my Hispanic politics class at UTSA. I actually have the article still here right now, where it's talking about how the Republican Party has made a lot of progress in terms of trying to reach out to Hispanic voters, and they've been successful in South Texas as well as in South Florida. Miami-Dade County in this past midterm election saw a huge increase in Republican support. So again, the Hispanic vote is not monolithic as you might expect, like with with kind of like more like the African American votes. And one of the reasons for this is because Hispanics are not lumped into one category, right? Because it's not just the Mexican Americans, right? You've also got all kinds of other groups, right? Cubans, Puerto Ricanos, and then of course also in Central America, right? Salvadorians, and we've got more of these groups. There's also a lot of people coming from Colombia, right? So we've got these groups that are not the same, right? Yes, they are Hispanic, but they have their own differences, right? And so that goes into why you can't just lump them all into one group, so to speak, right? So Latinos and Latinas are more likely to vote when residing in states with higher levels of Hispanic representation. So like I mentioned, states like California, Florida, Texas. Texas is kind of an interesting state here, right? Well, that's more so for Texas government. But in a lot of these states, New Mexico as well, Arizona, we're seeing it. We're also seeing more Hispanic involvement in other states like Illinois, Washington State, where more Hispanics. New York, of course, that's another. I totally forgot about New York and the large Puerto Rican population. So we are seeing more of these. Georgia as well, North Carolina. We're seeing some of these states, start to gain. As Hispanic population increases, like in the Atlanta, Georgia area, we are starting to see more of this. Voter turnout rates in some of these areas, but it's going to take a while as Hispanics start to move into these areas. So, okay, let's talk about Asian Americans really quickly. So, Asian Americans have a strong political presence in several states. Usually, states like on the West Coast, such as California, Oregon, Washington State, Hawaii, and also New York. These are the states that tend to see strong, political support because of the fact that these are, going back to history, right? The Western states were the closest states to, to Asia, right? So it made sense that that was kind of like the first stopping point for, for the new Asian immigrants that were coming over, especially, coming to work in California. Asian Americans turn out to vote at levels similar to Latinos and Latinas. And the Asian American population is also going through a similar situation with the Hispanic population, where the Asian American population also has diversity, right? In fact, you could even make an argument that the Asian American society is probably even more diverse than Hispanics, because Hispanics, they share a common language, right? For the most part, they tend to share Spanish. But when it comes to the Asian American population, they don't share the same language, right? You've got Chinese, Japanese, Koreans, Vietnamese. You could even Filipinos. You also have other groups from Asia, right? Like, what about people from India? What about people from the Middle East, right? Are they considered Asian? So Asia is such a huge continent. I mean, it's the largest continent in the world, that it would make sense that there would be a lot of diversity when it comes to people. So that diversity makes it very hard for the Asian Americans to, kind of band together, right? And to have that shared sense of community because of the differences in race and culture and things like that. So, because you've got South Asians, and then, East Asians and all that, and so it becomes it's a lot more of a diverse group, so it's hard to get them to to really coalesce, so to speak. They have moved toward the Democrat Party in recent elections, though, which again is not all that surprising, considering where they live, and the Asian American population has also helped to solidify why the Western states tend to be Democratic strongholds, right? Like California, Oregon, Washington, especially on the western portion of those states, right? So, Seattle, tends to be Democratic, but then Spokane, Washington, on the eastern part of Washington, tends to be more conservative. They're closer more to Idaho. So usually, the further west you go in these states, the more, the more, I guess you could say, the more liberal they tend to be, and they tend to be more on the Democrat side. But yeah, so similar to the Hispanic population, because of the diversity, it's also hard to kind of, lump them into one group, so to speak. Okay, let's get to gender participation. So let's talk about the gender gap here. So women register to vote at rates similar to men, but are more likely to vote, right? So the voter registration rates are pretty even between men and women, but women tend to vote more so than men, right? So again, so that's also key to remember, right? That women have higher voter turnout rates than men, and also look at the political parties they tend to support, right? So men vote Republican at a higher rate, and women vote Democratic at a higher rate, right? So men tend, again, this is not all the time, right? But on average, men tend to be a little bit more conservative than women. So men tend to vote Republican at higher rates than women do, and women tend to vote Democrat at higher rates than men do. And this refers to the gender gap, right? The gender gap refers to a distinctive pattern of voting behavior reflecting the differences in views between women and men. The gender gap runs around 10 points in presidential elections, and it reached 12% in the 2020 election. Now, there's a reason for why we have this gender gap and these differences in political viewpoints, as well as political participation, right? So policy priorities and issue positions often differ. So women are more likely to oppose military activities and to support gun control and social spending for healthcare and education, right? So women tend to they tend to be more concerned with social issues when it comes to uh, because I women tend to be when we look at more social spending for healthcare and education, it's not ironic that these are fields that are dominated by women, right? In terms of education, we tend to see more female teachers, and in healthcare, we tend to see more female nurses. However, there is a problem though, right? Because it's hard for women to kind of move up in these positions, right? Because yes, they're teachers, but how many of them move up to be like administrators and superintendents? Same thing with like women in the healthcare industry. How many of them move up to be like CEOs of hospitals? There's still, kind of that glass ceiling, so to speak, within some of these professions here. And of course, they tend to, to support, gun control. Again, also not surprising that, because of sadly a lot of these mass shootings that we had in schools, right? We just had another one a couple of days ago. Very sad situation that unfortunately we keep having some of these. And so because again, they're women more often tend to be tend to be in the education field more than men, that's affecting them, right? Because we're having these mass shootings in schools. So of course they're wanting to put a stop to this, right? Because that's they're at risk, right? And their children are at risk as well. And so the women, of course, are less likely to run for office, even though they are just as likely to win as men, right? So we will talk about later on, especially when we get to the Congress chapter, how elective office is still dominated by men, but we are seeing more. More diversity within some of these in Congress. Like we have like the squad that's composed of like AOC and all them. So we are seeing more diversity within elective office, but again, it's still we'll talk about how it's still dominated by men. It's usually older men as well. So but again, but we are seeing some of these changes here, right? So okay, let's get to religious identity, and then we'll get to a couple other things, and then we'll stop here for today. So religious identity also plays an important role in American life. And again, as I've said before, I know a lot of people who this is how they vote, right? And I'm sure some of you all have also met some of these people too, right? Where what determines their voting patterns is based on their their religious identity, right, and how they view, and how they view politics, right. And I'm definitely, similar in a way, right, in that what influences me in terms of what I focus on and how I view politics, obviously, is also based on, on my religious beliefs and my spiritual beliefs as well. But there are some trends that we do want to talk about, right? Especially when it comes to like the religious right and the conservative movement here. Various court decisions have reduced overt religious influence on public life, leading to a counter movement to restore the role of religion in civic life. So, an example of this is the Vital case from the, we talked about the Vital case in in chapter, was it chapter 4, right? Yeah, we talked about it in chapter 4, where that was the court case that banned the prayers in schools that were being led by the schools, right? Like the teachers were leading the Christian prayers, and that was causing controversy because not all the students are Christian, right? So you had, and that of course was promoting, that was a violation of freedom of religion, right? Because you cannot have, when it comes to freedom of religion, you cannot be advocating for one religion over another, right? You can't be promoting one or another. So that's what they were doing. So because of this, though, there has been pushback from the religious community, against, some of these cases. Roe versus Wade is another great example. And then of course we have the Hobbs case, which overturned it, right? So that's an example of the counter movement to try to undo some of the, some of these court decisions and try to restore the, religion and civil life. And so leads us to the white evangelical movement, the religious right movement. This, of course, this movement, occurred in the aftermath of Roe versus Wade. This was begun by religious evangelicals like Pat Robertson, Jerry Falwell, and they created the Moral Majority and all these different groups that were trying to, like it says here, right? Trying to get religion, try to get religion back into a more prominent role within civic life here, right? Pat Robertson also ran for president back in the 80s, right? So this is the group, that, again, these tend to be people that support the Republican Party, right? Because these are your pro-life people, and they use religion as the main driving force for how they're going to vote, right? So today, roughly 1 in 4 Americans are religiously unaffiliated. They're secular, and members of this group vote heavily Democratic, right? So again, not to say that every person who is religious tends to vote, on the Republican side, but the point is that there's more of them, right? There's more of these evangelical groups where the abortion issue is what, drives their politics, right? And so I was saying earlier that you probably have met some of these people, right? Like I said, I know some of these people where that's all they vote for, right? Is the abortion issue, right? That's the only thing that they're concerned about, is where they will determine whether they will vote for a candidate or not based on how they view the abortion issue. Now, of course, as I've said before, that's definitely not how I see things, because I look at things a little bit more holistically. But again, that's their right to do so, and so so religion definitely does play a large role in how these people are going to vote, and as well as how they organize too. Okay, so okay, so we're almost done here for today. Okay, so a critical aspect of the political environment is whether people are mobilized. So mobilization efforts attract voters to the polls. So mobilization is the process by which large numbers of people are organized for a political activity, right? Getting people to turn out to vote, getting and not just mobilizing for that, but also getting them to engage in other actions, right? Such as registering people to vote, volunteering to do the phone banking, where you call people and try to get them to support your candidate, right? Doing the block walking, or the canvassing. There's different names for it, right? Going door to door and talking to people about it, right? And trying to get those people involved, right? So personal contact is important for mobilizing voters, right? There's no substitute for going and talking to people. They've done research on this. Going door to door works, and if you're going to run a successful campaign, you have to do that, because people are going to want to vote for you because you went to go talk to them. That is something that has been proven time and time again. And social media does try to mimic face-to-face communication, but it's not the same. This is why some people were making the argument that in 2020, some Democrat candidates weren't able to do as well as they would have liked, because this was during the pandemic, before the vaccine came out. So, and rightfully so, people were hesitant to go door to door because of the virus, right? So again, there really isn't a substitute for this. and going door to door and mobilizing voters that way is effective, right? So since 2000, competitive presidential elections have motivated both parties to build strong grassroots organizations. And by 2016, political campaigns shifted to social media to mobilize votership, right? So let's see. Let's okay. So I want to make sure that we have enough. Yeah, we can cover this in about 5 minutes. Okay, so give me just a moment here. So competitive elections play a key role in voter turnout as well. What this means is that okay. So let's kind of use a sports analogy, right? If you've got one dominant team that's steamrolling all the rest of the teams, and then they make it to the championship, but they win the championship, unless you're a fan of the team, no one's really going to care because there's no there's no competition, right? The outcome is already set, right? You already know who's going to win. So because of that, if you have a situation where if you live in an area where, let's say, you're a Democrat and it's mostly Republican, then you're not going to be motivated to turn out to vote because, well, do you feel like your vote really matters if the outcome is already decided? So that also plays a factor, right? If you don't have competitive elections where you feel like your vote, would count, then that's going to inhibit voter turnout from occurring if you already know the outcome, right? And so many congressional, state, and local elections are non-competitive due to gerrymandering. Which we're going to talk more about gerrymandering in the election chapter. But basically, what it means is that it's the drawing of districts to favor one political party over the other. And we will talk more about this in the election chapter, as well as the electoral college, which creates variation in electoral competition across states. We'll talk about the electoral college, and we'll break that down here in chapter 10 here. And then ballot initiative, of course, the electoral college is the system, the way the president is elected. But like I said, we'll talk more about that in chapter 10, the election chapter. Ballot measures and initiatives and referenda on controversial policy questions increase voter turnout during elections as well, especially when it comes to some of these more recent referendums, like to recall governors, like we've seen like in Wisconsin and California, or some of the initiatives like to make marijuana legal in some of these other states. So that could be also a way to get voters to turn out if they feel that their vote actually could generate something that they are wanting or in favor of, right? Okay, so let's finish this really quickly. So we might go a little bit more time, but I just need a couple of minutes because we just need to cover this really quickly. So state electoral laws can make voting easier or impede voting. Give me just a moment. So because every state is different in terms of how they, in terms of the election laws that they have, this creates situations where some states will have higher voter turnout rates, and some states will have lower ones because of the way the election system is set up within states. The most common reason people do not vote is because they are not registered. So again, this is an important this is an important thing. This is an important concept to understand. Is that you can't just go and vote if you're not registered, right? You have to be registered first before you can go and vote. But every state is different in terms of how they do registration, right? Registration requirements vary by state and can reduce turnout. The impact of these requirements is often greatest on people who are young, less educated, and less affluent because, again, they might not know the process. They might not know where to begin. They don't know how to get registered. The way it works in Texas is you have to fill out, the voter registration form, right? And it asks for your information, and then and then you give it to one of these BDRs, and then the BDR turns it in. The deputy voter registrar, they turn it into the county elections department where you got registered in, and then they send it off to the state, and then the state has to verify that you are a citizen. They run your social security number and all that, and then about a month later, you get your voter registration card in the mail where it gives you your precinct, based on where you live, right? Because where you live is going to determine which elections you're going to be eligible to vote in, right? So because I live in the city of Mission, I can't go vote in the city of McAllen school board race because I don't live in McAllen, right? So depending on where you live, that's going to determine where who you're a constituent of and what for future elections you're going to vote in. That mostly affects state and local races for the most part. Now, other states have what's called automatic voter registration, AVR. This was instituted in Oregon in 2016 and is now approved in 19 states and the District of Columbia. What automatic voter registration is, this is where eligible citizens are automatically registered to vote or have their information updated when they interact with government agencies such as the DMV. So basically the way it works is that when you go get your driver's license, then once you turn 18, then the system that the information that you entered in when you got your driver's license is still stored there. And what it does is that it automatically registers you because the state already has your information, right? So because the state has to verify your information when you get your driver's license, they can also do that verification automatically once you turn 18. So that's one option. Texas doesn't have that, but in some of these other states, mostly, in mostly like in the West, they tend to have this option. And then we also have what's called same-day registration. Again, also not in Texas. This is an option in some states to register to vote on the day of the election at the polling place, right? So this is where if you show up to vote on election day, but you're not registered, they can register you right there, and then you can vote. So again, Texas doesn't have that because they need that verification time frame. But in other states that are more lenient on this, they can allow for you to vote the same day that you're registered. So again, just note that states have different requirements here. So okay, let's see. So I just want to make sure that okay. So let's okay, three more and then we're almost done. So let me kind of get through this really quickly because I do want to go through the entire chapter here. So there's also voter ID laws that can be a barrier to voting. Basically, that you need an ID to vote, right? They require voters to provide proof of identity. This exists in 36 states, 35 in force in 2020. 14 states and the District of Columbia have no ID requirements to vote. So Texas, of course, is one of these states, and as you can see, uh, almost all the states in the country have this provision. So this is a provision that is popular amongst states here in the United States here. But Republicans argue that these laws are needed to prevent voter fraud, and Democrats counter that voter fraud is nearly non-existent and ID laws suppress turnout. So this, of course, is a huge battle that's going on within the United States in terms of what I mean by this is that there's been a lot of attention in the last couple of years to voter integrity and and trying to ensure that people are the people are who they say they are when they comes to voting. But there is pushback on both sides to this, and I think we could probably all agree that it is important that that the person who is voting is the person that they're voting, right? But there's disagreement on how to get there, right? There's disagreement on, because Democrats make the argument that, is this much to do about nothing? Are Republicans in the right to be giving this much attention to, to this issue of, voter dishonesty? Democrats are making the argument that it's not as big a problem as Republicans are saying. And then Democrats are also making the argument that it's difficult for people to go and get these IDs, especially if like that this might affect, poorer people because they have to work more often. A lot of them have to work two jobs and they might not be able to go to the DMV. So it definitely becomes kind of a back and forth here in terms of, the how the different sides view this issue, right? So I think everyone could probably agree that it is necessary, to verify who's voting, but the way they go about the verification is where we have these differences. And then so another barrier, of course, to voting that has grown in importance is the denial of voting rights to convicted felons, right? We talked about this a little bit, right? That in 48 states and DC, prison inmates with a felony conviction are prohibited from voting. 21 states, felons who are on probation or parole cannot vote, but voting rights are restored when their parole or probation is completed. So Texas is this state, right? Where if you are involved in the legal process, because probation and parole is where I think some of you are familiar with this, right? So probation is where you don't go to prison, but instead you're still under supervision, right? So you have to check in with a probation officer. Sometimes they have, like the ankle bracelets where they keep track of where you're at because you have to be like home at a certain time or things like that. So, and then parole is where you get let out early from prison, right? So let's say you do a 10-year sentence, but you get, they let you out in 5, and then you have to do like a couple of years of parole. And again, you have to check in with a parole officer, so you're still under community supervision, so to speak, right? So the idea is that if you still have some of this community supervision, that you temporarily lose your voting rights. But then it gets restored once you're no longer within the legal system. But then in some states like Florida, 11 states, felons lose their voting rights forever for some crimes. So this disproportionately affects minorities, with 1 in 8 black men unable to vote due to a criminal record, because unfortunately there is more of that correlation between African American men and unfortunately being more likely to be involved in the criminal justice system, for a variety of different reasons. There's also sociological reasons for that. And then last thing we'll take a look at really quickly, let's take a look at the voting reforms. So election reforms that focus on making registration and voting more convenient. We have what are called permanent absentee ballots. This is the option in some states to have a ballot sent automatically to the voters' home for each election. This was a very popular form of voting, especially during the pandemic when people were weary of going, to the polls and having to, maybe they felt like they couldn't social distance adequately enough, and I certainly would ascribe to that. But thankfully, I never did absentee ballot because my polling place, it's never packed. So I felt safe, going to vote as long as I was wearing a mask. I was only there for a couple of minutes, so I felt fine. But for some people, especially people who are immunocompromised, this was definitely a very popular, and you can look this up yourself, that this was a very popular way of voting during the pandemic, where the state mails you a ballot and then you send it back. 30 states have home voting, defined as all mail or no excuse absentee voting. We also have other type of absentee ballots for, like, let's say you're a student and you're going to you're out of you've gone to a university out of state, or maybe in another part of the state, but you still want to vote in your local election, then you can also do absentee balloting for that, right? Because you still technically are registered to vote at home, but because you're not at home, you're away for a time, you can also have an absentee ballot, to still vote at home. And then, of course, we also have early voting, which provides the option to vote before election day. So Texas does have this as well. Texas has about 2 weeks of early voting. For the most part, it's about 2 weeks, where you can vote. It's basically the same ballot, but you can vote early. And I do early voting because, again, I don't want to be stuck with a lot of people on election day. So I definitely do vote early. I voted early in all the elections I voted in. I don't remember the last time I voted on election day. I prefer early voting because no one's there. So it's a lot easier, and it's very quick to just do what you need to do and go. Okay. So sorry that we kind of went over a little bit. Thank you all so much for staying the extra 10 minutes. I'm very sorry about that. I just wanted to make sure that we covered everything for today. So let me go and stop the recording here right now.